Welcome to the Affirming Village podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin-Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village.
Welcome back to the Affirming Village podcast. Today we are going to talk about how summer can show us what children can access when support, demands, and environments change. In episode 1, we talked about why summer is not always a break. In episode 2, we talked about family boundaries and protecting your child's needs.
Today, we're talking about what summer break can reveal about support, access, and fluctuating capacity.
Sometimes when school ends, families notice that their child has less access to skills they were using during the school year.
Sleep, communication, transitions, eating, toileting, regulation, or independence may shift.
And that does not mean the child is going backwards. It may mean that the supports around them have changed.
But we may also see the opposite. Some learners seem lighter, more connected, more playful, or more regulated when school demands disappear.
And that can tell us something too.
So instead of only asking, did my child lose skills? We want to ask, what does the break reveal?
What became harder when the supports disappeared?
What improved when demands decreased?
And what does this tell us about what the learner may need when school starts again?
Because fluctuating capacity and recovery are both information.
And that information can help families advocate for school environments that better match their learners' needs.
Woohoo! You gotta love our intro scripts, right? Can you guys tell we're reading a script? Because we very
I could tell.
Ooh, summer. Yeah, I think I like the premise of this episode because I think as parents, as advocates, as professionals, we often can absolutely see both sides of this. We can absolutely see before the school year even ends, some of our parents are concerned, right? About like, what is it going to look like when they return in August? Because our brain doesn't go, or September. Our brain doesn't go August, June, August, May, September, July. Like we're thinking 365. What does this look like? And then we have some parents that are like, oh, it's summertime. Thank you. Like, this is going to be great. We're going to rest. We're going to recover. And then you have our in-between parents. So I like that we're going to kind of look at all those different angles and sides because it's definitely different and can be different depending on the part of summer that you're in for your learner and what you're seeing and how their school year was.
Yeah. No, for me, I feel like we talked about this in the first episode. Just that pressure that parents can sometimes feel over the summer of like, we're supposed to both maintain and increase skills and all of the right. And I feel like this is a little bit of a reframe towards curiosity and information gathering and away from um, like having to do something per se, right? We're just sort of noticing, right? I think that there's a duality here that can coexist, right? I think that um, we just we're recording on a Friday. We had community this morning, and some of the folks that were in there were talking about how they're really witnessing this recovery in their child. That sleep has improved, access to nutrition has improved, overall regulation has improved, right? Because it had been a really tough school year. And I think that that's a truth for a lot of folks that, um, I've heard this from a number of families that I work with that they're feeling like they're seeing their child again, right? Their child is becoming more themselves again. Um, but I also think that, and we discussed this, I believe, in episode one as well, that that lack of structure can be really hard, and the routine practice of even just the routine of getting up and going to school and do it right, eating at a particular time and doing all of that can actually, to a degree, set the stage for regulation and predictability and all of those things. Um, so it's just really interesting to witness kind of this duality in fluctuating capacity. What pieces are sort of increasing that window of tolerance, and what pieces are kind of chipping away and actually causing stress for the learner.
Yeah, and I think what you're speaking to too is how we talk about like that balance,
Hmm.
right? And I think that's something that I wish school staff and families had a better understanding of that. I mean, and I know my husband and I talk about this all the time. We're that family that when it's winter break, Thanksgiving break, summer break, we're like, yes, we get to sleep in, right? Like I work for myself and, so I set my schedule behind when my kids may need that support in the morning as we're going to school and things like that. And so it's
Sure.
nice to have that sleep in, right? But at the same time, our kids who are both neurodivergent, they don't do well with no structure, no plan, no concept. They like rest, they like the ability to maybe say, no, we don't want to go anywhere today, but
Sure.
they don't do well with just like free for all. And that's not every learner, of course, but so we've had to find ways where like, okay, you still have breakfast at a coordinated time, right? You still have lunch at a coordinated time. You still have dinner at a coordinated time because that is what helps them still maintain that routine. And what I was saying by like wishing that school staff and families were on that same page is there's often that concept of because they're not at school, they're not doing anything, there's no routine, there's no structure. And that's why when they go back to school, it's a struggle. And it's like, no, it's because often as we learn our children and we learn how to decrease that demand and that pressure and to allow that rest and recovery, we are more flexible. We do allow more autonomy, more choice, and that's kind of taken when they go back to school. And so now it's that balance of going back into that environment that is demand heavy, compliance heavy. And how do I balance that? And so I think parents often are fighting to say, no, I do still parent my child, right? When we're out on summer. And then school staff is fighting to say, I actually don't want to place all these demands on your child, but I'm having them placed on me to place them. So, I think that's a big piece of that is seeing like, maintaining that balance and everyone feeling like they're communicating kind of their intent to support the learner's needs.
Yeah, no, as you were talking, I was thinking that you're gonna laugh at me. It's so nuanced. Oh, I did that right as you were taking a sip. For those not watching on YouTube, I caught Destiny right as she took a sip of her drink. Um, that like oftentimes we hear, I think in particular with autistic learners, that like they really need to be at school, they need the routine of school, the structure of school, and right, sort of this implication that like home is sort of this chaotic, I don't know, unstructured place. Which I know folks don't necessarily mean as criticism or judgment, but that's kind of the impact of those kinds of statements. It's how it lands often. Um, and one of the pieces that I think is missing when we think about sort of the value of school and the structure that school provides, because there's partial truths in that statement. I'm going to credit Rachel Dorsey for this. Rachel is an autistic speech pathologist out of Massachusetts, really wonderful, amazing human. And we've shared a family for a really long time. And one of the pieces that she always lifts up with this team, not that they know how to sort of take it and go with it, I'll keep that real, But I have taken it and been thoughtful about it and tried to implement it is what does respite during the day at school look like? Right? So it's like, to me, it shouldn't be a binary. It shouldn't be that school is only demand and compliance and work and a heavy structure and, no flexibility, da da da. And home isn't some like free for all that's absent of all of those things, right? And so, what are the ways that we can sort of notice or observe respite, recovery, flexibility during the summer that seem to be increasing our learners' like capacity that perhaps could be incorporated into the school day. And when we are placing demands or have a structure that we're maintaining, how is that supporting capacity, number one? And is there sort of a strategy or a nuance or a way in which we're presenting these things to our children in the home environment that, again, also are potentially applicable within the school environment, right? So, for sure, I think that there are some families that are worried about like academic skill drop off, right? And so they do designate some time, maybe it's not daily, but they do designate some time where there's some practice or there's some reading or there's something that's happening like in an academic realm. And it's like, okay, well, what does that setup look like in the home? Right? Are some of the accommodations that have been supportive in the school environment, are you implementing those? And one of the things that's kind of coming into my mind is this idea of like proprioceptive or vestibular input. So like gross motor, big, kind of body movement, deliberate input prior to trying to attend to a task that requires focus or, fine motor or whatever. Like, how are we supporting regulation? And if we're kind of playing with some of that in the home environment and it isn't written into the IEP well, and we see that it is supportive of their ability to kind of focus for a little bit longer or engage in that task that's a bit more challenging, um, are those accommodations that we can then write into the IEP?
No, yeah. And as you were talking, that made me think about my youngest, who did ESY this summer. And it was only one time a week for 2 hours. Um, and he loved it. And it was in one of his hardest areas, and he's very open about this because, I always say I don't share stuff my children want me to share. We recently discovered she's dyslexic, and so it was for reading. And so what happened was, because it is summer, because it is less time, because it is less students, it's also in a different location, right? Which at first he was like, I'm not going in there. Um,
Fair.
but what happened was they worked on the reading, and then like they also weaved in, like, he loves to run, and they did like a race. And so, and they would time him, and he was like, I got this fast and I did this, and it was amazing. And like he didn't want to leave when it was time to pick him up.
Right.
And it really speaks to how we wish, and I think staff, like the staff, every time I went to pick him up, they looked refreshed, and they, like, and it really speaks to, I think, how they wish it would be, right? Like they, like, it's so much less demand for everyone. It's so much less overstimulation for everyone. You really are kind of, from my understanding, and both of my sons have done ESY in different years, it really is like this is their IEP goal they're supposed to be working on. And then like you run with it, right? Like you've never met this learner typically. Sometimes they may be from your school, maybe from your class,
Sure.
but there's an expectation of just like you take this and run with it. And to do that, you have to build those relationships, right? And I think that is something that speaks to that flexibility when you're talking about at home and how we access it, right? Because I'm not making my kids sit in a desk at a table to tackle something. Like when we're reading, we're actually in bed. I set a timer, and we have our books, and we start reading it, and I ask him the questions at the end, and we're working on it together. And it's like a real quick piece, but it has that impact. And so I think that's kind of what I think about when you refer to that, is like that flexibility. And I know the other day I had posted something, and I post so much I don't even remember what I posted. But
And I post nothing. So together we balance each other out.
a teacher commented, and she said, this post reminds me of first being in the building after COVID,
Oh,
when they were
sure.
first having us go back after virtual. And she said, and it reminds me of how they essentially were like, this could be stressful. We know you could be overwhelmed. This is going to be so they basically just let the staff kind of just take it
Right.
slowly, do what you need to do. And she said that was the best time, because we were all really learning how to be around and interact again. Like, you were still nervous about, what can I do? Like, I don't want to catch it. I don't want to give it to someone. How,
Right.
she's like, so it was a more relaxing environment. There was more, besides, obviously that was tension, but she's like, it wasn't like this lesson plan. You have to teach this. They have to know this. It was like, we've never dealt with this. So we just want you guys to come to work. We want them to come to school. We want everyone to figure out how to navigate this new norm. There had been grief, loss, right? Some people had lost family, they had lost friends. So it was
Yeah.
just like, we don't know how to tackle this. And she said, and because of that, we really collectively came together and supported each other. And she's like, I feel like everyone was more understanding on the kids' side and the parents' side. Everyone was just more understanding. And I think that really speaks to that, what we wish schools could look like, right? What we wish summer understanding could be. Just like teachers will say, like my sister and my mom are teachers, and my sister's just like, there's some times where she's like, I'm barely out of my room the whole day because I'm recovering from the school year. And it's like, it shouldn't be like that. But because it is, I like that understanding to weave through for everyone when it comes to really, and that's why I think they start off the school year finding joy again, like switching it a little from the learners to the teachers. My sister and my mom were out today, like my sister's home for 4th of July, and they were out today, like shopping for her classroom, and my mom's shopping for her classroom, and my sister's like excited about her theme. And it's like, because she's had that rest and that recovery, she misses her kids. She's so glad to be on summer, but she's like, I miss my babies. I can't believe they're moving on to the next grade. Like, but
Right.
it has to do with having the ability to rest and recover and rediscover that joy, right?
Yeah.
Her for teaching for kids, it's like, my kids are already like, I miss my friends, I miss my teachers. Like, they have that ability to rest and recover, and now they're thinking about the school year coming up, and they're not ready for it to come back yet, but they're also missing their friends, and they're missing the building, and they're missing that routine and structure.
Yeah. No, for sure. Absolutely. And I think, you lift up a really important piece too. And I think this is a valid thing to talk about is how to kind of weave rest, respite, recovery, not just for learners and like into the IEP document, but for parents, for educators, for, related service providers, administrators. It's like, I feel like we spoke of this at the end of the school year, is that it's such a common pattern, right? We start the year with a bit more energy, and that capacity wanes over the course of the year. And by the time we get to the end of the school year, seems to me everybody's like just kind of crawling to the finish line, like, oh gosh, right? And so when we think about ways to support the learner's nervous system needs and their capacity and sort of building respite in, how are we kind of thinking about that as parents for ourselves, and how is school staff kind of doing the same? Um, I don't know. I spoke about this at your summit, and I feel like I said this. I'm pretty sure I did. In the conversation with Diana Fannin for her upcoming summit, which was happening later in July. Um, that in order to support the nervous system needs of our learners, we have to first sort of recognize our own as the adult, and sort of where are we at, and is this situation sort of capturing my attention in not such a good way? And like, what do I need? Right. But I just like the idea of, and maybe I said this in an earlier episode or not, I don't know. This idea of like reducing the pressure, right? I feel like we spoke about summer feeling like, or can feel like we're supposed to do all the things. And my hope is to reduce that pressure. And so this idea of being curious and noticing and wondering and having that be information that could be applicable to the IEP process. I don't want it to feel like yet another task or another to-do item. But really just sort of noticing what works. And I think both of us encourage families to connect with school teams early on in the school year, to just like, there's lots of flux that happens, right? So establishing new relationships, reconnecting with old relationships, like, um, all of the things. And I feel like entering the space with sort of this curious framework of like, these are some of the things I really noticed that my learner was missing this summer that I tried to replicate, that I feel like the school environment's really supportive of. And here are some of the things that I noticed just in terms of them feeling like they could breathe a little bit easier and like be a little bit more themselves, and their capacity increased and their sleep improved and their nutrition improved and their humor came back, and right, like all of the things, what are some small ways we can build some of that in? And so it's much more of like a thought partnership type conversation than a y'all haven't been doing and the IEP this and do da da da, right? Like, but I feel like it's potentially an opportunity to just sort of witness, observe, and quietly, for lack of a better way of putting it, collect data to inform a future conversation.
No, and I think what you talk about, what you're talking to, that we talk about all the time, is that I think often when we have discussions like this about access and support and environments, what are parents is noticing, how do we translate that over into school and IEP, we often end up in this dynamic of, and I see it on my content all the time, because I'm always gonna, call something out, and it's never calling someone out, it's calling the system out, it's calling out what can we do to address this. What does this look like? Someone saying, oh, so now it's the teacher's job, so now it's the teacher's job, and I'm like, the reason you feel that way is because the system has created that, right? The system has made it so that if there's an issue, it's the teacher's fault, it's the teacher's job to fix it. If it's not the teacher's fault and job, it's the parent's fault and job. And what I'm saying is, and what you're saying, what we're saying, is that there are natural ways to address things, right? Like, my kid getting to race, you know, and not even race against someone, but just like run, and they clocked it. I'm like, you can do that at recess. You know what I mean? You can do that. You can
Right.
literally, when they're at recess, be like, okay, at recess, I'm gonna let you run and I'm gonna clock and see how fast you are, and like you can see if your friends want to join, and you can. But that was something like that small that he enjoyed because he loves to run and he loves to race. And so I think what we're also speaking to is that there are natural ways to incorporate things. And I think the school system itself, like that system being built, doesn't allow for that. And that's why you see staff struggle with like, how do I even do that? And one of the things I'm a big proponent of is giving them like, you do this in your classroom already.
Right.
Just start with that. And they're like, oh yeah, I do that. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and that goes into that
Right.
partnership piece you're talking about too, is a lot of times it's just not even having that conversation, right? And I also have a lot of parents that they don't even recognize, and I've said this in many episodes before, like one of the biggest examples I use is transition, because
Mhm.
I've seen it so many times where the parents like, oh, we don't do anything particular for transition, or I don't see where they struggle with transition at home. And then we have a conversation and they're doing a countdown and a timer, and every 5 minutes they're telling them, and they're providing with a comfort. Like they're doing all these things, but it's
Right.
so natural to parenting. And then it's also so natural to their learner that they don't recognize that like you are doing all these things. And
Right.
it's something that they can also replicate in the school setting. So I think you really just speak to like those natural transitions and supports that schools even build in naturally, like visuals. Nobody, you're not going to walk in anyone's classroom and not see a poster, a paper, something up that they've required them to have with content on it. That's a visual, right? And it's because we have learned that certain things are beneficial. Now, the content of it, I may not agree with because a lot of times it's not neuroaffirming and
Those
it
are details.
100% ableist, but those natural pieces that collaboration can build can also support and try and ease some of the demands and the pressures, like you said, that pressure valve, and release some of that during the school year, which ultimately makes it a better situation and environment, like I always like to say, for not only that learner, but the staff and their peers. And that's how I always try and loop everything back, is that this is not going to just benefit the learner, because when we think that way, unfortunately, societally, then we think like, well, that's going to harm others, when that's not what that statement means either.
Right. No, I love what you said about like getting curious and creative around sort of naturally embedding some of these sort of strategies or supports or whatever in the school environment and using your youngest's adoration for running and racing and being timed and all the things, right? Like to me, I was going to ask you, and then you answered the question already around like 2 hours is a large chunk of time actually to be focused on a task that's challenging, right? And so I was going to say, like, what are they doing to sort of help with that engagement, right? And so to me, I have multiple thoughts, and they're all competing with one another in my brain. But one of the nuances that it sounds like is they didn't make him earn that time, right? It was like, oh, you love to do this, let's do the thing, and then we'll come and do it, and then we get right. So it's maybe a first then, but not in the like kind of gross you have to earn, but it was just like more like a schedule. Like we can do this and then we can do that, and then we'll come
It
back and
was
do bit a beep, right? Like,
absolutely a expectation of,
right,
on the end of like the expectation of he will get to do it. So you're 100 to, yeah, it was, the expectation wasn't, you're like you said, like you're going to do this and this. The expectation was, because I am doing this, in his mind, he's like, because I am doing this, I'm going to get to do this.
100%.
And that was just the structure, and he knew that. And so they always had to allot that time, because he's like, I'm going to get to do this. And to your credit, that 2 hour block, yes, he has to have it broken up in increments. So it was like 10 minutes, then this, 10 minutes, then this. And his autonomy and choice came in of him choosing the in between activity. And
Right,
then that agreement on, okay, you're going to do this activity for 5 minutes,
right.
and then we go back to this. And so you see how that's also mutually working together, autonomy, choice, routine, structure, all the things that
All the
are me.
things. Yeah, collaborative problem solving, all of it. Yeah. And so to me, and I think your brain works this way too. I feel like part of our job as advocates is to sort of anticipate the hurdles, the roadblocks, the misunderstandings, the miscommunications, and kind of address them before they happen. And I could see a team, not from a place of malice, but just from a place of conditioning, sort of incorporating something like that as a reward, seeing it as a quote unquote motivator or whatever. And so I think being really careful um, about how you're presenting, and by you I mean anybody that's listening, like this is a love, this is a passion, this is a great way. But to me, if we just hold the running as an example, so to me that's something that brings him joy. That's something he really likes, and it kind of gets him going. And he's excited about it. It's competitive with himself or with whomever if he's running against somebody else. Um, it gives his body that movement and that input that it potentially needs to ground him to be able to access the task that's requires a lot of focus and energy that's more difficult for him. But the other piece that you named in terms of incorporating it at recess time is that there's real opportunity for connection with peers, right? And so, and I actually think there's opportunity for autonomy, right? So I could see, and I hate the word fade because it drives me nuts, but like I could see some adult facilitation happening potentially initially, but I could see that being handed to peers of like, it's just an accommodation. You get access to a stopwatch at recess and you and your peers can take turns timing or right like there's ways to kind of build some of that relationship and social connection. And really what we started at was how do we help this young person access and focus on this difficult academic text, but we can like check lots of boxes by naturally incorporating something throughout the day that doesn't overwhelm staff, but it like for lack of a better way of putting it kind of kills multiple birds with one stone, right? Like you're accomplishing quite a bit with one thing that's relatively simple to implement.
110%. And it came about from that first time I dropped him off, and she was like, or picked him up, and she was like, so we weren't super happy about the having to read part. And we had done all the prep. His para like had talked to him about ESY. We had done all those things. And she said, and then I learned he loved to run. And I think sometimes educators don't even realize how naturally they build those relationships. She could have absolutely just been like, hey, dude, like, we got 2 hours. This thing you have to do, right? Like, you just gonna have to do
Right.
it. We're gonna have to suck it up, and it's gonna be what it is, right? Right.
Right. She could have
She
lost him
was
before she
like,
started because
yeah,
that
like
wouldn't have
she
gone
was
over
like,
very well.
like, come on, give me this time. It'll be fine. It's just a little bit like, and she 110% was like, oh, let's like, we're learning each other. And she'd already said that. She's like, we're just gonna learn each other today. She'd already told him that. But because this is not my kid's first rodeo, like he's been to 2 different schools now, the 3 different childcare centers, I think. He's like, I'm not new to the getting to know people and having to listen and do things, right? So he's like, it's just more so like, oh, this is the thing I struggle with, right? And so I think that her doing that though built that relationship and facilitated that. And, I think probably even you can always carry that over into other children too, right? There might be another kid that is not as open to whatever task is having to happen. And you might be able to say like, oh, they like running. But for him, he absolutely was just like, you're taking interest in me, what I enjoy, and then you're helping me. And so I think, excuse me, those things are that natural piece, I feel like, that they start out with, um, having to build that rapport. And I think every classroom essentially, for the most part, because we always say staff don't get into this to harm children and things like that. Like they, for the most part, they start out those first few weeks, months, like getting to know the learner and like we're learning together and what do you like and how do I incorporate that? And I think that we slowly lose that. And as we lose that, because of the demands and pressures, like I have so many tests I need you to take, so many grades I
Sure.
have to have it, and so many lessons plans I have to write. You have to show this growth. You have to do well in the state testing. Um, because of that, then we see that need for respite and recovery during summer. And I think if we were more fluid and natural throughout and considerate of that fluctuating capacity piece, I think that we would have more natural things built in that allow for that decompression. Like I know when I was growing up, we had like movie Fridays. And it was just like you knew, like on Friday, they're gonna, like somebody always said, they're gonna wheel in that cart and it's gonna have the giant TV on there and you're gonna watch a movie. And the teacher was just basically like, don't be acting crazy and like we're good to go. You know what I mean? Like, like
They're done. I'm done. And this is what we're doing.
right.
Yeah.
Like, so you're talking to your peers still, but like, don't get too loud. But it was just like a good time. And I just always think about like now kids have to get that during spirit weeks. Or, like otherwise they're not naturally getting that we're going to watch a movie, we're going to decompress. And so then in turn, staff doesn't. And so we're not getting that rest and recovery piece. And we're just kind of always, I think, too, that flips over to the being honed in on that regression for academics. Like we're always honed in on like, oh my gosh, they have to know this, they have to know this. And I think we miss the basics of if we're not regulated, we're not accessing anyway.
Right. I have two thoughts, and they're not related. Well, I'm sure they're partially related, but so the first one was just to put this in folks' minds, the value of that kind of all about me page, like that one page, this is my kid, this is who they are, this is what makes them tick. Um, Same thing is true for like an IEP cover letter. My learners qualified under da da da. Their goals focus on these areas. These are the most important accommodations. Here's a few key things to know, like ways to connect with my learner, things they're passionate about. Boom, boom. Looking forward to collaborative year. Thumbs up. Here's how you can reach me. Um, so like the value and importance of that, because in a situation like you were describing with your youngest for ESY, it was a one-on-one situation. It allows for that flexibility. It allows for that relationship building kind of differently than like a classroom teacher dealing with I don't want to say dealing with, getting to know, you know, a cohort of learners, right? That looks different because it's not a one-to-one situation. Although if there's a para involved or whatever, then yes. But generally speaking, it's like, how do we sort of scale that? And so I think front loading some of that information is super important. So that was one thought I had that I wanted to name. The other thought, and I'm just gonna say it. There's a lot of ableism wrapped up in accommodations and folks' feelings about accommodations. And that the hope and goal is to fade accommodations. I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me. Um, that this ableist idea around growing independence and fading support and fading access to accommodation, all these things really truly gets in the way of protecting that capacity and providing respite within the school setting. And I think that it's a really maybe uncomfortable thing to name, but it happens pretty much everywhere. So it's really, really important to name. Like I'm thinking of one learner in particular, and I won't get too in the weeds, but let's just say shit hit the fan and this young person is no longer in the public setting. But it really all started around lunchtime accommodations that, eating in a cafeteria with Lord knows how many folks in there and the noise and this and the smells and the who, all the things, way too much for this young person. And so we started asking about accommodations during lunch. And I mean, the level of pushback, it's like, really? What are we doing? Like, and so round and round and round and round and round and round and round. And it became this thing. And there was a stage like in the cafeteria. I don't know. I'd never been like on campus. But the accommodation was that this learner could like go behind the curtain on the stage and like basically sit in isolation on a stage, like so not appropriate. Anyway, lots and lots of things unraveled. That wasn't the only thing. But I think that that was a really important miss, that there was so much refusal to provide an accommodation because it would have required a little bit of ingenuity and perhaps, a separate location, right? Or reducing the pressure to eat during lunch and allowing food in the classroom, or, right? Like, and they had their feelings about that, or whatever it was. That this young person started to break trust with the school team, and definitely the communication between like the folks that over like the lunch staff, like, and the rest of the like sort of IEP team was poor. And so even if something was sort of decided during an IEP meeting, or like, oh, we can try that during a, it wasn't getting communicated to lunch staff, and so things were unraveling, and it just became the snowball that just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and like took on a complete life of its own in sort of all areas of school. But this was a team where it was like, we have to build in respite. Like, this is such a simple thing. Why can't we accommodate? And I feel like it'd be remiss to have this conversation and not acknowledge that even if there's no like malintent, that is a that is a mindset that a lot of folks have, is that like the goal is to sort of strip the accommodation. And so I think that mindset can interfere with that curiosity and with that willingness to sort of open the door to some things, even if they're simple, because they don't they don't want it to be something that the learner like relies on and then can't access the building without. It's yeah,
They don't
your
want them
face
to
says it all.
rely on it. They don't want to give them a leg up. I've heard that. Like, well, we don't want to give them a leg up over their peers. And I'm like, if you want to go there, the peers already have a leg up because they don't have a disability. Like, cut the bullshit. Um, sorry. As Lisa was going to drink, I knew I was going to say that in my head before you even were done talking. Um, but no, you're 110% correct. And again, if you're not watching on YouTube, Lisa was going to drink, and I said, cut the bullshit because that's what it is. Sometimes the accommodations is because we don't want others to feel othered. And by not accommodating, we are making them feel othered. And I think that's the piece that gets left out. I've had so many times where I have to reframe for adults how we accommodate ourselves. And then our peers see that and they go, oh, I'm going to do that because that's amazing. Like, I need that too. But if we were to say like, so everyone should be allowed to do this, then it becomes a like, well, let's not, everyone doesn't need that. Right. And it's like, but could it benefit them? So, and I'm
Right.
not going to go on my ableism accommodation rant, but no, you're 100% correct. Because when we talk about that respite, that recovery, we have to acknowledge that that is needed because of what is not given, right? What's not provided. And to, like you said, it's not about malice, right? Sometimes it's not about malice. It's not because it doesn't want to be provided. I've had teachers provide accommodations that like aren't written in the IEP, and they're like, because the student needs it, I don't give a shit if you're going to write it in there or not. I'm going to do it because it benefits them and it benefits me and it benefits our class, right? And I love those teachers because they're like I'm gonna do it regardless, so you guys can't put it in there or not, but I think it'll be beneficial, so we're gonna do it. And it's because they see the benefits of it. And I think that's often what our really strong neuroaffirming, I don't like to say good, but like our educators are battling against, is that they're seeing these benefits of things and implementing them, and how that is giving everyone the ability for respite. Um and another thing you brought to mind for me was that, we struggle with my oldest advocating for his breaks
Mhm.
because there is this ableism that has been perpetuated of you not leaving the classroom is a positive, means you're doing better, means you're doing well, means you're doing as your peers are doing. And nobody has stated this to him outwardly. I mean, his team this year, amazing. His staff last year, amazing. But that's what it appears like because my peers are not leaving the classroom because they are staying in there. And when I was leaving the classroom, I was getting in trouble and I was so dysregulated so it's become this narrative in that regard. And so I think we also have to look at again how we're perpetuating the inability to access by shaming the need for respite and recovery.
Right, right. And I think part of the reason why I lifted up is A, it just exists and is a truth, unfortunately. But also sort of back to that idea, as our job as advocates is to sort of help prepare parents for like where the roadblocks may be, that, certainly not trying to be like doomsday, but I think to be prepared that depending on the team and depending on the ask, there may be some pushback of we don't see it and it's got to be data driven, right? Like all of those kinds of things. And that's where I think that kind of home data piece can become really valuable of like, I noticed if, you know, I just put breakfast out and didn't say anything, like I sort of strewed breakfast or I strewed an activity. And by strew, I just mean just like place out without saying anything and just sort of it's available in the environment. And if the learner gravitates towards it, great. And if not, great. Like, um, I noticed they could access mealtime differently, more successfully, get some calories in, versus me saying, "Hey, Lisa, it's time for dinner and I need you to come sit at the table." Right? If I placed that demand, Lisa didn't eat. But if I placed something just on the counter and, you know, sat down and ate my own meal, they might sniff that, you know, whatever the hell I put together didn't smell terrible.
But you just named several things though, right? Like placing it on there, making it available, not having them come there, giving them that autonomy and choice on whether or not to access it, when to access it, taking the pressure off. This is what you have to do because it's what everyone else is doing. Sitting down and eating, providing that co-regulation they may need to access it, right? See how all that was just natural, but it was just like, and I think back in when we were growing up where it was just like, you might sometimes you might they might be like, okay, well, that's the food, you can eat it or not. Um, and so it's I think that's the piece that you're really speaking to in that regard.
Right. But when I think about that in terms of how it maps in a school setting, being able to tell a school team, like, my learner responds better, can access activities, whatever, better if it's just kind of placed out and then they're the one making the decision to engage versus the reminder, it's time to, Lisa, pull your stuff together. Destiny's dog is joining us today. So sweet. Mine are not in the room. They lost their privileges. um,
You about to lose
just
his.
those little things. Those
Yeah.
little things.
But
So
I think he's helping us hint to because I have no idea when we started this episode. I know we're under our hour mark, but
we're getting close, I think.
okay. So I think he's helping us. His name is Shadow, by the way, for anyone that he's a standard poodle. And he's doing the most. He's still a baby. He's just one. But I think again, the reason why we feel like this episode was a good builder to acknowledging that we can see some of that regression, right? Or, that change in skills and capability when we don't have that access, which is why we've mentioned ESY before, why, I wanted my son in ESY. I was the one that was like, I want him in ESY because I knew knowing learning disabilities, knowing dyslexia, that was going to be a barrier if he didn't have that direct instruction. And I'm not a reading intervention specialist. I'm just his mom who's an advocate that's learning everything she can and accessing everything I can and providing him with everything I can. But that's not my wheelhouse. And then on the opposite side, seeing how the rest and the respite and the recovery allows them to access, to make decisions, to access food, to eat, to do all that. And I saw um, just very quickly, I saw where a parent had mentioned, has anyone seen their child regress with toileting? And it made me think of this and how, like, now some of my learners, I have families I support, they have a toileting schedule at school and they go certain times and they're asked to go certain times and all of that, right? So if you take that away, right, or not even take it away, parents are doing it, but now they don't have that. Oh, I know I go before math. I know I go after
right, the
social
contextual
studies.
clues.
It's gonna change their internal cues and mindset because they haven't made that connection yet for when they need to go. So I think that's something that's just very important to consider is that summer can bring about more access, respite and recovery, and it can also bring about more stress and that fluctuating capacity and capability because of not having those structured supports in place.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think this conversation um, just highlights just sort of the reality that so many things exist in duality, or right? Like, and those things can be in contradiction within one another and still exist in duality, right? Like we can see um, stress, frustration, increased access to skills. I really think the toileting example is a really tangible one where, like, if the learner is really cueing not so much to the clock, but sort of the schedule, like we go to the bathroom after recess or whatever, or after lunch or before math or whatever it is, and just those context clues just don't exist within the home. So you're using the same visual, you're using the same whatever, but it's not resonating in quite the same way. Like that's a really tangible example of like what you could take back to a team to say, I'm really curious and like this is what it looked like at home. This is what I use, same tool. What does this look like this coming school year? Is the bathroom schedule at school going to map last year, or are we going to increase sort of flexibility around it and start to kind of generalize that skill? And what are we doing to work on interception? And where's the OT? And right, like all the things, right? Hiding, the OT's hiding. No, I say that really not to throw shade. It's just such an area that we have so underinvested in that there's a lot of gatekeeping around sort of access to direct OT support. It has, I adore OTs generally speaking, but boy, is it hard to get direct support. That could be a whole different episode. I'm not even gonna pretend I didn't say it. Like we're not even gonna go there.
Yeah, I think that's making me think for the fall, we need to do like a related service provider episode, like
Yeah.
on each related service that we've come across and access and how it can be implemented from a neuroaffirming standpoint.
Ooh, I like that. Write
Yeah.
it down.
Yes.
It's
I
on
know
record.
if not, I'm gonna forget. Um, no, yeah, but hopefully you all, got some points from this episode about how, like Lisa said, it's that duality and there can be that contradiction, but access looks very different. And we want the adults and the children to have access. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin-Wright, and we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.